ladies and gentlemen, for joining us for this session on security. As you know, the title of the session is Security in the Times of Insecurity. So what we've seen happen in the last 2 years, I mean, we are today in the middle of a fundamental changes in the international system. There's a war in the heart of Europe for the first time since the Second World War. There's talk about another war in Asia, where China and Taiwan. There is, for 2 winters, now we're into the 3rd winter, Indian soldiers are deployed at 14,000 feet to deal with a Chinese aggression on our frontiers. So in many ways, I think these are really times of insecurity, and the challenges that India confronts of how to deal with the new environment. Besides the external ones, we have internal security continues, the problems in Kashmir, various types of insurgencies within India, they continue. And to address these issues, I mean, how do we think about security at this point of time? We have these 3 editors who produced this book. And I would say, really congratulate the 3 of them, because while the interest in defense has grown, the problems on the defense front have grown, there's very little accessible writing. That we have a lot of coverage, but very little overview, very little coverage of the issues involved. In-depth, a lot of stuff happens, but I think accessible for people like you and me to read and understand the kind of challenges. And I think this book does this remarkably well. And it covers a number of areas. We have 10 chapters in this book, and an introduction and a conclusion. But I have not seen a good primer like this for a long time. So I would strongly recommend all of you who are interested in defense issues, security issues, to really take a look at this book. It's easy to read, and I think there's a lot to learn from this book. So I'm going to start by asking Manoj Joshi to tell us about the design of the book. How was the book structured? And then we'll take it from there. Manoj.
Thank you, Raj. Well, you know, as the book suggests, that it's in hard times, so it had to do with COVID and the shutdown and the near economic meltdown at the time, and the whole point that we needed to adjust strategies and policies appropriately, because you couldn't, with COVID around, we didn't know which way it was headed. So we got hold of a group of people and managed to get the book out. Unfortunately, just after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, so that portion has not really been included. Now, in an overview essay in this, Praveen and I have called for radical revisiting of the assumptions that have guided our policy. We pointed out that on one hand, we were spending a smaller proportion of our budget for defense, and on the other, we had spent, even if we spend 3%, right now we're spending 1.8 or something like that. So if we even spend 3%, it would not be sufficient. In these circumstances, India needed to adjust its national security strategy for hard times. And we have argued that we need smart power rather than brute power. That's the essence of this book. We gave our writers more or less a free hand. So we have Dr. Sanjay Baru, who's discussed the whole issue of India's global status currently, emerging power, and he sought to look at the evolution of great power competition and India's place in it. Then we had former chairman of the Chiefs of Staff Committee, Admiral Arun Prakash, who's written a very fine essay on the maritime imperatives. So people talk about the Navy, but you've got to talk about the whole maritime space, not just the Navy. Then former Chief of the Northern Army Command, Lieutenant General Huda, his chapter sticks close to the theme of the book as to how the Indian Army should approach its capability development. Then we had had a couple of retired service officers, Colonel Vivek Chadda, now with the IDSA, Wing Commander Air Vice Marshal Manmohan Bahadur, Wing Commander K.K. Khera, looking at the Air Force angle. But I would like to particularly commend an essay by a young scholar called Pranay Kotasthane in Bangalore, who has who made a profound analysis of India's defense budgetary problems. He says even with Agnipath, you are not going to get the benefits of Agnipath till 2034, which means your modernization remains stuck. Now, my fellow editors, Praveen and Nishtha, will tell you about their particular chapters. But we have an anonymous essay by an intelligence professional also on intelligence reform. We say anonymous because the government threatened intelligence officers saying, well, your pension is at risk if you if you write openly. So that remains that who he is or she is has to remain a secret as far as we are concerned. So I'll just stop there and then we can look at the points ahead.
Manoj, I'll start with you before going to the other panelists. So the first question on the external environment. There are some people who say, look, we're in this fantastic sweet spot. India can shape the outcomes. On the other hand, there is a lot of pessimism as well, that given the external environment might create bigger problems for you. So could you tell us a bit about how the book looks at the external environment for India and what it means for us?
Well, that old Chinese saying, whether opportunity or threat. So India is in a sweet spot. Economy is doing well. China and the USA are quarreling. We have opportunities, a lot of opportunities in the whole emergence of this Indo-Pacific kind of framework. But whether we can actualize it is the issue. How do we actualize it? Meaning, as it is, we have seen that the principal beneficiaries of the decoupling of US and China in the Indo-Pacific region was Vietnam. We were not able to attract those industries. No, so that is the central point I'd like to make is everything is going for us. Population, demographic dividend, economy. In fact, even if the government tries hard, they can't spoil the economy because the opportunities are such. But the problem is we have to actualize everything, and we need that leadership. And this leadership, in my view, has to come from the very top. It must be from the political class. It's not enough to say this bureaucrat or that department or this industrialist should do this thing. I think the political class needs to pay far more attention to the practical aspects of governance rather than wasting their time on all kinds of issues like movies and artwork and all kinds of stupid controversies. They need to focus on governance.
Thank you. Let me turn to Praveen. Praveen probably has covered more about India's internal security issues more than anyone else in the last 3 decades. So Praveen, tell us, we have Kashmir insurgency still there. You have a whole lot of other problems. The Naxalite problem still remains. How do you review the internal security and the kind of challenges that we have?
Right. So unlike guys who cover military and geopolitics, internal security is a bit of a gutter inspector's view of the country. The sort of first response you'll get from anyone looking at our circumstance right now is that things have never been better. Levels of insurgency in Jammu Kashmir have been in pretty steady decline for 15 years now. The Maoist insurgency, which people said was going to tear the country apart, down, nothing to talk about. A lot of our ethnic insurgencies in the northeast in decay. And I suspect that's led a lot of policy makers into thinking that our problems are over in one way or the other. Because modernization of our counter-insurgency forces and our police forces has pretty much come to a grinding halt. Now the problem in India is that these prolonged phases of hiatus are not unusual. We don't like talking about it. We of course talk about Kashmir and the Pakistani effort to seize it. But we waged bitter insurgencies in Telangana, in the northeast, after our independence. And these were extremely bloody wars, and some of the wounds they left behind in those regions are even today far from solved. I don't know how many people are aware, for example, that the Indian Army moved Telangana Adivasis on a very large scale into concentration camps in 1949, or that we used air power against civilians in Mizoram. and that entire villages were, uprooted. A lot of Indian planning at that time was derived from the British, and there was all this nice stuff about hearts and minds, and then you move troops in. And we now know that much of colonial insurgency, that this nice fuzzy hearts and minds stuff was complete nonsense. That's not how they fought their wars. They were brutal, they were savage, and they relied on a massive asymmetry of force against the insurgent. And we internalize much of that, but despite our rich experience of counterinsurgency, we haven't really derived new doctrines, new whole of government approaches, new sort of concepts to deal with these problems. At our officer academies, sadly, books from the 1950s and 60s, Gerald Templer and so on, are still taught. And the point I've made is that we cannot have a successful outward facing country if every decade or decade and a half some crisis erupts within, that a lot of these crises are preventable, and that the answers lie not in the seduction of force after a crisis breaks out, but in enhancing our capabilities, the state's capabilities to govern through law and order instruments like functional police forces and the courts. And our failure to do this is what has precipitated these cycles.
No, one of the issues as terrorism mounted in the last decade, I mean, we talked about the problems that federalism poses for policing the country. I mean, you have a center, you have different states, and each one has their own police force. So have we made any progress dealing with we had the huge problems creating NatGrid on terrorism.
Right.
So can you tell us about the problem of federalism? How it...
There's some success in terms of creating a national police architecture or infrastructure. So you have CCTNS today, which is the beginnings of, if you like, a national computer database, which, but overall the picture is not a bright one. So the central government for many years pumped in a great deal of money into police modernization, which sounds lovely, but if you look at actual granular expenditure, you'll find a lot of that money went into buying vehicles or building housing, and very little into improving quality of training, improving the quality of hiring and retraining. There's some terrifying data from the National Crime Records Bureau recently, which suggests that an average Indian police officer spends less than 1% of his working career in post-induction training that has any opportunity to train anywhere. We haven't really set up benchmarks and standards for police forces across the country to follow. Now, I think even skirting the federal issues, having benchmarks, saying that you will be funded only if you meet certain benchmarks, this has been done with other kinds of policies. This can be done with this. But the sad reality is there's no incentive to do it. At the end of the day, every chief minister wants a station house officer who can get, some stuff done locally. The structural incentives to reform on this stuff are extremely poor.
If I come to you, Nishtha, I mean, this year's Republic Day parade, those of you will watch it in the next few days, the Air Force contingent and the Navy contingent are going to be led by lady officers. So that's probably a first. But I don't know if the Army is doing the same thing. But Nishtha has an interesting chapter in the book on the gender issues. I mean, in the last few years, we brought in women into the armed forces, into combat roles. So there's really a whole lot of interesting things have happened in terms of the gender set of issues relating to Indian armed forces.
Right. So I would first like to dispel this this idea that gender has to be done for equality purposes in the army and all. And this is a great argument to have. That 50% of the population is of a certain sex. So yes, representation has to be equal. And right, that argument is fantastic, but that argument has led us nowhere. We are still talking about, my first paper for ORF was actually about gender parity in the armed forces, and that was a decade ago. We are still talking about the same issues 10 years later. So I just decided that, where is it that this paradigm is going wrong? And then, something just struck me that we have to approach this issue through a lens that actually matters to men equally, which is money. Now, when you induct more women, it just does not bring in more gender parity, which is a great thing, but it also makes the defense expenditure more rational. That is the argument that I have made in my chapter. And I feel that when women are given certain roles, like in combat roles, this is such a jaded debate. What happens if women are taken as prisoners of war? This honor and responsibility and that whole shebang of our culture. Now, what are we doing here? We are just saying we are fetishizing women's body then, and in a way we are saying that male body is less important than the woman's body. Because would we be happy when Abhinandan Vartaman was there behind the enemy lines? The entire country was talking about the same thing. So why this resistance about women being taken, or why these jitters all across? Right, so these are 2-3 things, and also about performance, about optimizing performance of a smart military. You get talent wherever you find it. Now, this whole thing about shortage of army officers, and we are top heavy. We do not have officers at lower level to actually execute our security strategy. Get more women engineers. Data tells us that AI, computer science, electronics and communications, more and more women engineers are actually coming out in the workforce.
And the
DRDO, all of it, women are leading the pack. So why is there resistance in getting them on board? Because it's not about gender equality, it is about getting talent from where we can get.
Manoj, I want to come back to those of you who've seen Indian space program, Indian missile program, is all led by women these days.
Absolutely.
So actually, a lot of the warfare is about technology. I mean, you'll have someone running the machine sitting in any part of the country if unmanned warfare really takes off. But we'll come back to that technology point. But Manoj, I want to ask you, we're already the third largest defense spender in the world. So it's not that in absolute terms, you're spending close to $60-70 billion a year. But at the same time, it is still below 2%. That's one part of the problem. Second, most of the money is going into salaries and pensions. So there's not enough for modernization of the equipment, what we call capital expenditure in the defense budget. So what does your book say? I mean, how do we get there into getting bigger bang for the buck, as well as spending the right amount that will take care of India's defense needs?
Well, you see, I was quite surprised. I went to Beijing and I asked the PLA people, what's the size of your PLA? And they gave me a figure which I thought was ridiculous. I mean, it was something like 850,000 or so. But now I believe that is indeed, they have conducted very deep cuts, because the point is you want a technology incentive military, technology intensive military. In our case, what happens is a large part of our military is also participating in counterinsurgency programs. Now, the question is really how to restructure the whole thing. The police really ought to be doing the counterinsurgency, meaning it's not the job of the army. And the army must focus on external adversaries, not on internal issues. So I think really what you need, and this is the point I made earlier in my remarks, you need political leadership, political guidance, meaning in the sense you have to work out a program of reducing the size of your army but increasing its capabilities through the induction of technology. But all that requires guidance, constant guidance. It's not something which you can say, General Saab, aap log kar dijiye, or the defense secretary issuing some order somewhere. It is somewhere some leader who must political leader of the defense system who has imagination. The last person we had of that quality was Mr. Arun Singh. And a big shift came along with that. In 1986-87, when we faced down the Chinese in Sundarong-Chu, we got that leadership. We had Arun Singh there, we had General Sundarji there, and we were able to face down the Chinese. The Chinese were really taken aback by this very aggressive Indian army. Today, the mindset has become much more defensive. And the mindset has become the zero error syndrome. That you, don't make any mistakes, just don't rock the boat, see? And yes, it's true that large part of the money is being spent on salaries and pensions, but the government has come up with this Agnipath, which I personally disagree with, because I think that you will get undertrained people. Because if you have only a 4-year a 4-year tenure, my own view, and this is old proposals also, that you should have at least a 7-year color tenure. 7 means that if you join at the age of 18, you can serve till 25. You see, and then, and equally important is the extent to which these people can be laterally inducted into other parts of the government. But here what happens is, state governments objects, they want to control police recruitment, someone else wants to control CRPF recruitment. So it has to be done in a holistic fashion. It can't be that you're only reforming Ministry of Defense. You have to reform the entire security machinery. And as it is, as I told you, that Pranay Kotasthane has pointed out, that this Agnipath thing, you don't get results till 2034, you don't get payoffs. But what's going to happen for the next decade? That means next decade, your armed forces modernization will slip even further back. Already we have seen in the case of the Navy, first they reduced their size from 200 ship Navy to 175. Now I think they're at 140. And the second aircraft carrier, which was supposed to be the larger aircraft carrier, has been politely, no one is saying anything about it, but essentially that has not yet got approval. So it's not coming.
Thank you. Praveen, coming to you. Intelligence, it's not often talked about, but intelligence is your first line of defense. What is that old saying? To be forewarned is to be forearmed. That it's really intelligence which tells you what is going on, and that you need a good intelligence setup to deal with your security challenges. After the Kargil surprise, that there was a whole review of this, the need for intelligence reforms, and that we need to modernize our intelligence apparatus. Now, since you've been covering the agencies for a long time, has the reforms suggested in 1999, 2000, have they been carried forward? If they are, what are the remaining tasks in terms of transforming Indian intelligence?
So that's a really interesting question, and I think one half of the cup is full. India's intelligence services are vastly more sophisticated in terms of technology, in terms of communications intelligence gathering than they were 20 years ago. Having said that, the ability to gather imaging or communication, that is information, isn't the same thing as knowledge. And there we haven't done so well. Partly this is because the intelligence services have become more and more police-led. So senior intelligence management is almost now entirely drawn, both in RAW and the IB, from the Indian Police Service, where there are many fine officers, but not necessarily persons with domain competence and linguistic skills. So where you will typically find an American intelligence officer serving in Tehran or Kabul, fluent in the languages, probably on multiple tenures in and out of those areas. There is no Indian equivalent of this. It's almost like the colonial era, where there is, a native guide and gun bearer who will do the running around. The second part of that is that intelligence can't be separated from the overall state of knowledge in your institutions. You'll remember, Raja, in fact, both of you will remember that after 99, there was a great deal of conversation about getting universities, for example, prepared to produce more linguists and people with area studies expertise. That sadly hasn't happened. The kinds of investments we should have made in top-notch language institutions, area studies institutions, has not taken place. And this comes across the board. So a few years ago, there was a big push within one of the intelligence services to have indigenous large number cryptography, decryption, cryptography capabilities. There's some fine Indians in this field. But our university departments are no longer producing the numbers of pure maths PhDs we need to feed this demand and to make it sustainable. So fine when it comes to saying, buy this weird and wonderful gadget and it will let you listen to Xi Jinping's phone. But even if I hear Xi Jinping's conversations, I need to make sense of them, be able to analyze Chinese politics, and that part we're not so good at.
One of the, people keep talking about Indian foreign service is so small, we don't have enough diplomats. And that argument is also generally reflected in state capacity. Nishtha talked about shortage of army officers. I believe that the numbers of Indian intelligence officers are so few. Is that, which is not a secret, would it be what, in 200, 300, how many officers do we have?
Well, executive officers we don't have a number for, but the figures for the Intelligence Bureau are given in Parliament. There were some 18,000, I think, all told, and that includes the clerks. We're very Mughal.
Yeah.
So for one guy who works, there's a clerk and a cleaner and a cleaver and a whatever. RAW is about 2/3 of that size, and again with this long tail. But you compare this with any self-respecting intelligence service across the world, and the numbers are tiny. And traditionally, again, I think the colonial heritage works a little bit on this, because the IB was set up as a very thin organization, which would work closely with state police forces and kind of be the bridge to Delhi. But that model of the 1930s, if it worked in the 40s and 50s, has broken down long ago. We haven't, unfortunately, had a leader who takes this matter seriously and is willing to, de novo conduct reforms in the way Manoj and others had recommended.
On the cyber issue, we talk about India as an IT power, but all indications suggest actually India is fairly low down in the hierarchy of cyber power. That smaller countries than us, including countries like Iran, North Korea, because they see the value of having cyber capabilities to disrupt other side. Have we invested enough in the cyber capabilities? Remember, there was a policy that was announced 10 years ago when Mr. UPA government was there. Have we gotten anywhere after that?
So I'm told, much of this is necessarily opaque, that, for example, Indian offensive cyber operations have improved over the years. Unfortunately, there isn't the domestic political ecosystem. Cyber is a particularly odd thing because a lot of the progress is driven by the private sector rather than the other way around. There isn't an ecosystem for it. Many of our smartest people
are in Bangalore, not in Delhi.
And once they've done up in Bangalore, end up in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
And the second sort of linked problem is the lack of, one of the arguments the intelligence officer in our book makes, there is no legal regulatory framework for our intelligence services, which sounds very nice, saying, we're secret, everything is off the books. But the flip side of that means that there is also no parliamentary accountability. Nobody can haul you up and say, why haven't you gotten these things done? Intelligence services across major democracies are regulated. They have to face questions. I'm sure their bosses find it a pain in the butt. But all in all, it's been a force for improvement.
Nishtha, one of the things that we don't talk enough in India, we talk about insurgency, links to warfare, but the broader question of technological change and the hybrid warfare that everyone talks about, information warfare, that capabilities have dramatically increased in the last few years. And today, warfare is not just kinetic one of actually using force, but actually using new technologies to defeat the other side. So you want to say something on the subject? And then,
Yes, and this is no secret that the days of actually holding the lance fighting, they are not going to be there anymore. And what the Ukraine-Russia war has actually given a glimpse of, that it will always be a situation where we are relying on boots on the ground as well as drones up in the air. And as Praveen rightly said, that yes, things have expanded, things have, capability building has happened, at least the conversation has happened, but harnessing hasn't happened really optimally. And this is my larger point, that you get talent from wherever it is available. So when I talk about getting more women, get more women engineers, get more women linguists, get more women analysts, pure mathematics, pure chemistry, pure physics, PhDs, get them on board, and forget about offensive capabilities, at least try and build our defensive capabilities. AIM's website was hacked, and it stayed hacked for days. I mean, it's one of the most shameful things. It's one of the most shameful attacks on our infrastructure, and people tend to overlook this thing. Like, as if it did not happen, it did not matter. The other interesting thing here is that when a scientist, a director of the atomic center, his computer was hacked, and the people who actually figured out how this has happened and where the things were, he and the team got pulled up by the establishment saying, oh my God, you are actually exposing our vulnerabilities, rather than giving them commendations and giving them, endless grants of like crores and crores of rupees to set up a system wherein these things can be preempted and just taken care of.
I think we got a minute before we go to the audience, but I wanted to ask the three of you. The book begins, I think, very signature Praveen Swami kind of story, where, talking about 200 AD, where two armies are locked in Greece, where one side uses pigs to disrupt a phalanx of elephants. So you talk about the importance of smart defense as opposed to mass of the type we see in Russia has failed. But I want to ask each one of you, 30 seconds each, if there's one thing we need to do to get to smart power, what would it be? So Praveen, you want to start quickly, then we'll go around.
My wish list,
Just one item.
more universities and more recruitment out of those universities. Do away with this civil service mindset for our security services.
Nishtha, quickly, yeah.
Well, the piecemeal approach won't work. You have to have a vision, and it has to be a holistic reform. You cannot reform one thing and leave everything else at the mercy of time and convenience.
Manoj, briefly, just 20.
India is a nuclear weapons power. Our principal adversaries are nuclear weapons powers. So we are going to not get into any kind of huge fight with anyone. In such circumstances, what we need, as we said, the smart approach, but what I think, in my opinion, we need is an intelligence-driven security strategy.
Okay, got it. Okay, guys, now we got 10 minutes, and I see a lot of hands. Okay. Is there this lady, please. Make it brief. We have a lot of hands up.
Yeah. Thank you so much. While I completely agree with you, Praveen Swamiji and Manoj Joshi ji, and of course, Mr. Mohan, Namita ji, this question is for you actually.
Nishtha.
Nishtha Gautam ji.
No, just make it quickly.
Okay. The thing is, I completely agree that to get women in the cyber security and what happened in AIMS and getting there using the intelligence is completely agreeable. But to get them in the military in combat roles is a big no-no.
Okay.
A big no-no.
I wouldn't say
Yeah,
that.
and why there's a shortage of officers in the ranks is because the Indian Army does not lower its standards at all.
Thank you. Thank you. Look, I think I've got lots of hands here. Yes, ma'am. Please make it brief so that we can get as many. I'll get all of them together so that we can.
Very good afternoon to all of you. It was very enlightening to hear you talk about security, etc. Being brief, I just wanted to know, as a common man, that such a highly sophisticated helicopter, which carried 13 most distinguished army personnels, including CDS Rawat, it had crashed. Till date, we do not know what had happened to it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, at the back. Yeah, at the back there. Yeah, no, behind you. There's a gentleman there. No, here. Stand up. Why don't you stand up behind you? Yeah, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. So my question is basically regarding the Russia-Ukraine war that is going on. So in that we have definitely seen how agile and how basically smart Ukraine is playing. So when we are talking, and as all of you have commented, that Indian army should take a step towards that, what exactly are the solutions that particularly should be implemented to achieve that? Because
Read
at
the
the end,
book.
because at the end we need a big army, as sir has commented, we have a huge borders, but we also need
Question.
yes, the question is like, as we will not have such a huge wars, so how can we, what are the small solutions that we should implement in a very near future?
Give the microphone to the person in front of you. Sir, yeah.
Why the bureaucrats like this IAS, IPS, IRS, IFS system, they are given all influential positions and decision making positions, and when can we get away with this system? What good is it doing to the nation?
Yeah, thank you. I think we have enough to start with.
Right. May I start, Raja? Yeah. So the thing about, madam, about lowering of standards, I think there is a lot of disinformation that has been spread for decades about women not being up to the mark. For example, there was a research as early as in 2002 about women's ability to deal with G forces, and in Bangalore the research was conducted, and it proved conclusively that there's absolutely no difference between men's tolerance for G forces and women's tolerance for G forces, but it's only now, this year, that we have women fighter pilots. Lot of disinformation. We do not have any research, coming out of this country. But you look at other places that have actually tried to address this issue and talked about agility in the army. The research shows that women are equally capable, even physically, of undertaking certain tasks.
Praveen, you want to?
Please read up a little, and then we can debate.
I'll just take the question on the civil services. I completely agree, and this is a problem not just in the intelligence and security sector, but across government. I find it perplexing that a guy who's done, I don't know, electricity for 2/3 of his career will then head the missile program or whatever. But that's how it is. That's the elephant in the room, and many of us have been hoping for many years this will change. It's the one thing that hasn't.
Manoj, yeah.
Yeah. Any specific point you want me to take up? No. Okay. Well, I heard the questions. There was this issue of the crash. The crash is well known. There is a particular condition of fog in which the pilot loses his judgment. And this helicopter did not have the technical equipment which automatically tells you that the ground proximity radar. So that did not give him enough information. But I just want to make one point. He spoke about intelligence. The big problem with Indian intelligence services, they don't want to serve outside the embassies. They want the protection of the embassy. But intelligence craft is dangerous, meaning you actually penetrate the adversary's country, you do all kinds of things. If you read some of the stories about Russian agents in Europe who are now being rounded up, they had been doing all kinds of things. They have changed their identity. Our problem is that our intelligence is also too bureaucratized. And I'm saying this because I was part of a high-level government task force, and we looked into this issue. And so they were just simply you see, this is the point. I think this point was made earlier. What can we do about the size of the army? So if you have a smaller army, you have a highly mechanized army, you cannot have the same defensive posture you have today, which means your army will be well behind the border. But if the border is challenged anywhere, the adversary should know that we will hit back and we'll continue to hit back. We won't cease fire till we recover our territory. You see, so this has not been the attitude. So likewise, with an intelligence service too, you need a certain aggressiveness in your strategy. The Indian tendency has been too much defensive over time, and the time has come to become more technological, more aggressive. Same thing in cyber. You've got to be aggressive in that area.
So we just have time for a couple of questions. Yes, sir, please. Can you stand up? Easy to get to the microphone. So if you can keep it brief, I can get two more
Yeah,
questions.
one question. There is a lot of discussion about India's external security. There is very little discussion in the public space about India's internal security. How do we make this come up? How do we make the states aware of the importance of internal security?
Thank you, sir. There's one hand at the, yeah. Can you make it quick and brief?
My question is addressed to Mr. Swami. You're doing a great service in the print, and I regularly watch you. The point is with regard to the intellectual vacuum that we have in the armed forces. We just had General J.J. Singh, the man, the army chief, speaking when somebody asked a question with regard to how good is the forces, are the forces, and here we had him talking, he was pandering to the public, you know, the man behind the
I
machine,
think
etc.
just stick to
The
a
point
question.
is, I'm talking about the intellectual vacuum that we have in the armed forces despite the DSSC, etc.
Okay.
Your take on it.
Thank you. I think we have enough time.
So great. To the simple answer, I would like to see the armed forces as well as the police services actually rewarding people who spend time to study. The best militaries in the world, I meet officers who are off doing their PhDs and their careers benefit as a result. You know the reality here, we don't have to get into it. Sir, on the question of internal security, I think most states are well aware of their responsibilities. They know the problems that lie ahead, but they are unable to invest in capacity development. There are no indices or benchmarks for what they need. A secure society is among a society where the law is enforced on an everyday basis. And I think if you want to see the Indian reality or our preparedness to do this, you just have to stand at any red light at any crossroads in the country and see the level of compliance, let alone insurgencies and so on and so forth.
So I think we've unfortunately run out of time. You all agree with me. This is a difficult subject. This is not a subject that's written too much on. So we have really have these three editors. I mean, they put together a book that answers a number of questions. I mean, those of you who have questions, I strongly recommend you buy the book and take a look at that. Because I think what we just heard, unless there is more informed public debate and there's more public questioning of policies, the reform won't take place. It can't be merely a top-led initiative. And I think we need greater awareness of the security issues internally. And I hope really many of our younger people in the universities, outside, and the media, which it's again tends to be not doing enough. Praveen is an exception in terms of going beyond the headlines. But I think we need a lot more of the internal debate. And I think this book really contributes to that. So please join your hands and give us these three writers a hand. Thank you very much.